Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for the Robert E. Howard Show. It's the Robert E. Howard Show today. We haven't done one of these in a while, Roger, but we had to do one today because I got some cool books in the mail from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. The Robert E. Howard Foundation Press have been reprinting some of their older hardcovers, books that are pretty hard to get nowadays, in new editions. You can get them in paperback or hardcover or ebook. And they sent me these two books, which have just been published. And they're fantastic. And these are two books from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press that I've been waiting for. I've really been waiting for these. So I was super excited to get these. This is fantastic. So the two books are Adventures in Science Fantasy. Adventures in Science Fantasy with a really fantastic Mark Wheatley cover. And this one I've been waiting for because this has Almuric in it. Almuric, which is one of my favorite Robert E. Howard stories. Almuric, a short novel which was published by Ace Books. And I read it in the first Ace edition, which I had found used in an old bookstore. And I love that story. I love Almuric. Partly because it was the first Robert E. Howard story that I read, but also because it's a ton of fun. So that's in here, Adventures in Science Fantasy. And this one, this is Western Tales. And look at that cover. I mean, Mark Wheatley outdoes himself with that. That's fantastic. So Western Tales, which has, I believe, all of Robert E. Howard's Western Tales. It's a pretty thick book that are not humorous westerns of the style of the Breckinridge Elkins stories. Those are going to get their own editions. But everything else, all his straight westerns, you know, they're all in here, Western Tales. And so this is amazing. You know, I love westerns. This has his regular western stories and also weird western stories, as you could guess from the cover. So we'll talk about this one in a minute. Let's talk about this one. Let's talk about Adventures in Science Fantasy. So this has a number of stories in it. It's a slim volume because none of these stories are particularly long. Even Almuric, which takes up over half the book, is just a short little novel. And that book, an interplanetary adventure, modeled very much on the Martian series by Edgar Rice Burroughs, is just a great story. Of course, very much an Edgar Rice Burroughs type of story, but written in Robert E. Howard's particular style. And the main character in this, Esau Cairn, is very, very different from John Carter. He is transported to the distant planet Almuric, which has been discovered by a scientist, and the scientist discovers a secret way to transport people to this planet. And Esau Cairn, who is a man born out of time, he's this big brutish guy who's just too darn strong to live in today's society. He gets in trouble with the law because he accidentally kills some. No, I think he deliberately kills some guy. Or accidentally does. It's been a while since I read it. I've got to read it again in this edition. Anyway, he kills some guy, gets in trouble, and his friend, the scientist, transports him to Almuric because he's got nothing to lose. You know, if he stays here, he's just going to be executed. And this great Wheatley cover, not only does it have Cairn and the other characters of the story, but you also, in this wraparound cover in the corner, you have the scientist who's using his machine to transport Esau to the planet Almuric. It's fantastic. An interesting thing about this book. So Almuric might have been written at the urging of Otis A. Klein. Otis A. Klein, who is best known today for his own series of science fiction novels. He wrote stories like Prince of Peril and some others that are very much modeled on Edgar Rice Burroughs' Martian stories. And so he wrote very pulpy adventure science fiction stories himself. But he was also, at this time, Robert E. Howard's literary agent. And it's possible he talked Robert E. Howard into writing this story, although I don't know for sure. Robert E. Howard never finished it. We do know that. And I've heard different things. I've heard that there's like half the book was written and then the second half was a draft. Certainly, the end of this story was written by somebody else, and that somebody remains a mystery. It certainly was not, the ending of this story was not written by Robert E. Howard. I'll read you the last paragraph, for example. So let's get to the last paragraph of Almeric. So Esau Cairn has been successful in all his endeavors on the planet Almeric. Now, for the first time, there is peace between the cities of Kor and Koth, which have sworn eternal friendship to each other, and the only warfare is the unremitting struggle waged against the ferocious wild beasts and weird forms of animal life that abounds in much of the planet. And we too, I, an earthman born, and Altha, a daughter of Almeric who possesses the gentler instincts of an earthwoman, we hope to instill some of the culture of my native planet into this erstwhile savage people before we die and become as the dust of my adopted planet Almeric. So Esau Cairn didn't give a crap about the culture of his native planet. He didn't. That is so far away from what this whole book has been about, and certainly the main character of this story, that it was clearly written by somebody else. Was that somebody Otis Klein? Maybe, although it doesn't really feel like his writing. I think it's much more likely that it was written by Otto Binder, who, from what I know, worked for Klein at the time. So it certainly seems more like it was written by Binder than Klein. But we don't know. It's still a mystery. And as far as I know, the introduction to this book doesn't address it from what I saw. All that said, it's a fantastic story and it's tremendous fun. And it's a really interesting look at Robert E. Howard writing this type of Edgar Rice Burroughs story. It's great. It's great stuff. And so, yeah, Adventures in Science Fantasy. A lot of the stories in this book, other than that, I haven't really heard of. Although The Challenge from Beyond, written by C.L. Moore, Art A. Merritt, H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, and Frank Belknap Long, story written by everybody, is interesting. That closes out the volume's main fiction. Then we also have Miscellanea, and and a bunch of stuff that were either unpublished or they were unfinished. We got some drafts and some synopsis of stories. So, the usual stuff you find in the Robert E. Howard Foundation books. Great, great stuff. This is a fantastic volume. I'm very happy to have it. Like I said, I've been waiting a long time for this. But this one over here is just as exciting. So this one, Western Tales. So, I love Westerns. June on the Range is coming this June. We celebrate the Western story every June over here at this channel. And Western Tales, perfect choice, I think, for that reading event. So, Robert E. Howard's Western Tales. This does seem to have all of them other than the Breckenridge Elkins stories, including his weird Western Tales. So this is a big volume. How big is this? This is 620 pages, it looks like about. So it's a pretty big book, just packed full of great stuff. Stories like The Vultures of Whiteton has both endings. That's a story with two endings. The Last Ride is in here. Wild Water, Knife, Bullet, and Noose, Gunman's Debt, The Judgment of the Desert, The Extermination of Yellow Donnery. So all of his Western stories are in here, including the weird Western stuff, which is fantastic. What do we got? We got The Horror of From the Mound, The Valley of the Lost, The Man on the Ground, Old Garfield's Heart. That one is particularly good. That's a great horror story. The Thunder Rider, The Dead Remember. So the Weird West section is fantastic. We've also got essays in here. And a lot of these essays I've never read. So that's pretty cool. We've got miscellanea. So we got unfinished and synopsis is there. Juvenilia. A bunch of Western stories he wrote when he was a kid. So, I mean, this is just a fantastic book. Again, I love that cover. That cover is fantastic. And so Robert E. Howard was moving in the direction of writing Westerns as opposed to fantasies. Certainly his Breckinridge Elkins series, which will get books of their own published soon, was one of his most successful series. And it's very possible that had he lived, he would have gone into the era of the Western paperback and probably written a bunch of Western paperbacks the same way Luke Short did and so many other writers did. And he probably would have been very successful at it. I'm sure he would have gotten back to Conan eventually and fantasy and stuff because he loved that stuff if he had lived. But this was the direction I think he was going in. Westerns and Western type fiction, regional fiction, you know, about the place that he lived in Texas. So it's interesting. And not all of these stories are his best, but there's certainly a ton of fun, very entertaining, and an interesting look at Robert E. Howard writing Western stories. It's great. I highly recommend this. And like I said, it would be perfect for June on the Range. I'm just saying. Both these books are pretty great. Very happy to get them. So now, you know, if you have all of the Del Rey books from the Del Rey set of Robert E. Howard, and if you get all of the Robert E. Howard Library books, the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press books, if you get all of those, you will have the most complete Robert E. Howard set of books available to this point. It's fantastic that all of this stuff is being republished. We still are waiting for some really important stuff from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. We've got the boxing stories that have not been republished yet, and the Breckinridge Elkins stories that have not been reprinted yet. So those we have to look forward to, as well as some other stuff. They're doing a great job, the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press. I applaud their efforts and their fantastic books. So yeah, these are available now. You should get them because they're great. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.